I have been asked by Swedish television, Australian television, and of course American television, what exactly is going on with all of this police brutality against black people. Can we hold the phone? According to the Washington Post, last year in 2019, there were 9 unarmed black men killed by the police by gunshot. Now there were 15 altogether. There were 19 white unarmed men killed by firearms, and presumably that number was somewhat higher when you add up those who were killed without guns. The point is, in recent years, at least as many unarmed whites have been killed by the cops as have been unarmed blacks. But when an unarmed white gets killed by the cop, nobody cares. No Van Jones, no Don Lemon, no CNN, no MSNBC hee-haw, and it gives you such an unfair and distorted picture about what's going on. Last year, there were roughly 15,000 homicides in this country. Half of the victims were black. Almost all of those homicide black victims were killed by other blacks, mostly young blacks. It is a huge problem within the inner city crime. Take Chicago. Chicago is a city that's a third black, a third white, a third Hispanic. Yet 70% of the homicides in Chicago are black on black. And get this, nearly 75% of these homicides go unsolved. Here's the problem. The number one preventable act of death for a young white person is an accident, like an auto accident or a drowning accident. The number one cause of death, preventable or otherwise, for young blacks is homicide. And again, almost always at the hands of another young black person. LeBron James, after the death of Mr. Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia, said that we can't even leave our damn houses without being hunted down and tracked down. Really? By whom? Of the 7,000 blacks who were killed, how many of them were killed by whites? Interracial black-white murder is very, very rare. Last year, there were roughly 750 such incidents. 500 whites were killed by blacks. 250 blacks were killed by whites. So blacks, at roughly 13% or so of the population, are responsible for twice as many whites being killed as whites killing blacks at over 61% of the population, whites. Who is tracking who? Who is chasing whom? The idea that cops are out mowing down black people is simply not borne out by the data. You know, they do collect data on this. There is a Harvard professor, a black professor. He teaches economics. His name is Rolling Fryer. And Professor Fryer decided to do a report, a search, a study on the extent to which cops use deadly force disproportionately against black people. And guess what he found out? They didn't do it. In fact, he found out cops were more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than on a white suspect. And Professor Fryer then said, it was the most surprising finding of my career. Isn't this good news that the police are not using disproportionate deadly force against black people? There was a similar study published in the publication put out by the National Academy of Sciences, peer-reviewed, and they looked at every police shooting in 2015 and in 2016. And they could find no evidence whatsoever that cops were disproportionately using deadly force against blacks. It is simply not true. Now, if it were just something not true and nonsense that a lot of people on the left believe, so what? But this has deadly consequences. Twofold. First of all, it encourages young black men to assume that when they're pulled over or questioned or stopped by the cops, there might be something violent that takes place because, after all, the cop is a racist out to get me. So that narrative causes greater tension than would otherwise be the case. The second thing is what Heather McDonald has called the Ferguson effect. In Ferguson, as you know, Michael Brown was killed by an officer. Officer was accused of homicide, and the DOJ did an investigation, grand jury did an investigation, and what did they find? The cop did absolutely nothing wrong. However, because of the accusations of racism by cops in Ferguson, next door St. Louis, cops began pulling back, probably for fear of being accused of being racist. Cops pulled back in Chicago for the same reason. In fact, the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, said cops have rolled themselves up into a, quote, fetal position, close quote, for fear that they're going to be accused of racism. What does that mean? It means less proactive policing. What does it mean? Crime goes up, and the most vulnerable people when the crime goes up are the very black and brown people that the Black Lives Matter and the activists claim that they care about. It is getting people killed. I once interviewed the president of the NAACP. His name was Kawese Mfume. And I said this to him, Mr. Mfume, as between the presence of white racism or the absence of black fathers, which poses the bigger threat to the black community? And he said without a beat, the absence of black fathers. The police reforms that the George Floyd protesters are demanding, in many cases, have already been implemented. Take the idea that the police department should look like the community it polices. I live in Los Angeles. The city is roughly 40% or so Hispanic, roughly 30% white, roughly 9% black, and the rest Asian Pacific Islander. That is almost exactly the percentage of cops mirrored by the LAPD. In fact, from 1992 to 2002, for that 10-year period of time, there were 2 back-to-back black police chiefs of the LAPD. Did it matter? Well, one chief, Willie Williams, presided over the LAPD during the O.J. Simpson case. And because of all these allegations of cops planting evidence, mishandling evidence, he did a full study to find out whether anybody had done anything wrong in handling the evidence against the O.J. Simpson case. This is during the trial now. Report comes out, says we did nothing wrong, everything was done by the book. It did not matter. Those who felt that the LAPD was racist and that O.J. Simpson was an innocent man, wrongfully framed by the racist LAPD, still felt O.J. Simpson was an innocent man, wrongly framed by the racist LAPD. It did not matter. New York City. New York City is about as diversified, its police department is about as diversified as its town. It has not stopped people from accusing the NYPD of racism. Recently, cops have said that they have been the targets of water balloons filled with urine, trash buckets thrown at them, cars set on fire. In fact, a former police commissioner, Bernie Carrick, says that as many as 600 cops out of 38,000 have either said they're going to retire or have put into motion their papers to retire, all because of the Black Lives Matter / George Floyd protesters accusing them of being racist. And they can't take it anymore. Now, I remember in Dallas a few years ago during Obama's term, 5 Dallas police officers were shot and killed. Several others were wounded. 3 police officers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, shot and killed, ambush style, and 2 cops in New York were shot and killed, ambush style. All 3 instances were done by 3 different black men, all motivated by the lie that the police were routinely mowing down black people. So this lie is getting a lot of people killed. And by the way, Donald Trump has been accused of creating an atmosphere that allowed what happened to Mr. Arbery in Georgia to happen. Donald Trump is accused of creating the atmosphere that allowed what happened to Mr. Floyd to happen. But nobody said that Barack Obama created the atmosphere that allowed 2 cops to be killed execution style in New York, 3 execution style in Baton Rouge, 5 execution style in Dallas. Nobody dared suggest that Obama's anti-cop rhetoric had anything to do with it. And there was a lot of it. Recall that after Obama got into office, he accused the Cambridge police of acting stupidly when they didn't. He said if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. He invoked Ferguson at the United Nations. And remember Ferguson, hands up, don't shoot, complete lie. He embraced Black Lives Matter, yet nobody suggested that Obama had a connection between those cops who were mowed down execution style by black men and his rhetoric. But Donald Trump, please, it is so incredibly unfair, and it is getting people killed. Knock it off. The biggest threat in the black community is the young minority who is doing crime against other minorities in that community. That's the problem, not racist cops. Are there racist cops? Of course. There are racist talk show hosts. There are racist doctors, and we need to deal with them. And a racist cop can do a great deal of damage. My dad ran a small cafe, and he told me when he gave somebody an excellent meal, person told 5 people. If he gave somebody a meal the guy didn't like, he told 25 people. So when you have a good experience with a cop, you're going to tell a handful of people. When you have a bad experience, you're going to tell a bunch of people. Now, every 2 or 3 years, the government conducts what they call a police public contact survey. They interviewed 60,000 Americans. Have you had a contact with the police last year? If so, what happened? What was said to you? Did anybody do anything inappropriate, say anything inappropriate? And in all the years they've been doing this, they cannot find any pattern of police abuse against black people. The data are just not there. We ought to deal with these instances as rare occurrences because they are rare occurrences, which is why they make news. The odds of an unarmed black man being killed by a cop are about the same as the odds of a black man being injured by lightning. It is rare, and that is why we deal with it, because it is rare. So knock it off. You're making things worse, you're getting people killed. Now, as you know, I've got a documentary coming out called Uncle Tom. It comes out on the 19th. You can go to uncletom.com and check out the trailers. Here's one. Most people are completely oblivious to the history of the Democratic Party.
The party of slavery,
the history of the Democratic Party,
Jim Crow laws.
They're erasing all of the history of this country.
They want to cover up history.
The real history, not the revisionist history.
If you are educated,
Black people have been taught
a narrative that has been created.
You're actually miseducated.
And that's when I realized I've been lied to.
I had been misled.
It unraveled everything that I knew to be true.
As I mentioned, coming to a home theater near you, Uncle Tom, be the first in your neighborhood to get your Uncle Tom merchandise. I am Larry Elder, and we've got a country to save, and I'll see you next time.